Hey, Jason. Happy New
Eric.
Year. Happy New Year to you, man. New Year's here.
Happy New Year.
Yeah,
Welcome back from all your travel.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Oh man. Can you see the color in my face?
Yes, and just the bliss across your expression.
I mean, I hope it shines through because we had some great trips, man, and
Nice.
I'm anxious to continue those in the new year here. But here we're recording this in January of 2025, and depending on where you are in your journey, whether you're still building wealth, you're on your path to FI, or you're figuring out how to sustain and optimize it after you've reached FI. A year-end review is really important to kind of keep you on track. And you and I both do this every January. And I just thought it would be fun to kind of show an approach to an end-of-year financial review, or kind of look back from both a pre-FI perspective, which, as you know, I transitioned from pre-FI to post-FI this year. But we'll also look at the kind of post-FI one. So I thought we could go through a couple of different categories, kind of mapped out a couple of high-level topics. I think the way I would start this is kind of with an overview and kind of goal setting. We do have a previous episode where we talk through financial goal setting and a real kind of granular review of how we go through this process. So I want this to be a standalone episode and a little bit different from that. We'll link that up in the show notes and also in the video if you're there, so you can go watch that for that kind of the other side of this process. But I think if I'm thinking pre-FI, your goals are basically on building wealth. You're hitting savings targets, you're increasing your income probably, and you're tracking progress toward your FI number. So I think the first part of this is kind of a net worth roll up.
Right.
And you and I are both doing that, right?
Yeah, I still do it quarterly, and then I look at it in a little different way at the end of the year.
If you can think back to pre-FI, before you reached your FI number, were you looking at savings targets as a percentage of income?
Yeah, I definitely had goals that I started with, and achieving that was the sort of base case. And then I didn't budget, right? So everything beyond that was kind of game for spending. And then my target every year was always, as close to 100% of any bonus compensation I earned was part of my savings as well.
Okay. So, when people talk about savings targets, there's a couple of different ways you can calculate it, right? Mm-hmm. Is it gross income? Is it net of taxes? Is it, how do you think about that? How did you think about it when you were thinking about a percentage of income?
Yeah, for me, I mean, the projections that I had that at the time I had developed with financial advisors were about dollar amount savings per month.
Okay.
So it was actual money going in. And yeah, that was based on some assumptions about percentages along the way. But at the end of the day, it really rolled up to this is my target per month that I want to be putting in my account.
Yeah, that's funny because I did the same thing. But I know a lot of people will say, the general advice is save 10% of your income,
right.
Set that aside, and you'll hit your retirement number by a typical retirement age. We're not obviously focused on that in the FI movement. So
right.
We need to do something different. So is it 25% of your income? Is it 50%? I always kind of thought, well, anything more than 50% is going to seem like, you're really working toward a number, substantially saving, that you're going to really feel that in your budget, right? 50% of your income.
For sure.
And I think there's all different kinds of blended ways to do this. I think the most accurate way is to take your total savings, divide it by your income net of taxes. Mm-hmm. And this just kind of makes it easier to compare, across different tax brackets and different situations. It's not how I did it. It doesn't sound like it's how you did it. I basically said, I'm looking at a target date. I'm looking at a target FI number. And then all I did was set monthly savings targets based on that. So last year, did you save anything? Because I know you're earning some income here.
Yeah, my discretionary income that I make from the Friday hours I put in at the winery, those are off budget.
Okay.
So I save that in terms of I accumulate that, but it is accumulation towards no specific goal. It doesn't hit a line item on the budget. There's the opportunity to do things like make contributions to HSA or make Roth contributions, for example.
Yeah.
But those are more, at the end of the day, those are really accounting exercises. They're not saving of income generated from work. So no, I don't have those kinds of saving targets. What did you do in 2024, both before and after hitting your FI target?
Yeah, so I kind of discounted that we hit the FI target and kept my monthly savings goal. I exceeded the savings goal. There was a few months where I was a little bit under, but the business does have lumpy income. So it's not surprising that that would happen. Right. If I look at it as a percentage, because I know everyone wants to kind of know that if people are tracking it that way, as a percentage, we were about 68% of income after taxes. But I don't want to use that for other people to say, oh, that's what I need to do. But I do think it's helpful just to hear what that is. Sometimes I go on Reddit and I look at, what people are saving per month. People ask about savings goals or targets. And
they do.
And I think a lot of people think they're saving a ton and they're actually not. They're under saving. And so I think it's good just to hear, a whole range there.
I think so too, and you're right to bring it up. And also, it can become a pretty complicated topic because people who are hyper saving to meet incredibly near-term fire goals, right? Particularly people who are lean fire and are intentionally living below maybe a standard they intend to in the future so they can save more, they're going to have those very seemingly inflated targets as well. So
yeah, for sure.
It always requires a little context like you're giving here.
As part of the net worth roll up, what other things are we're looking at savings targets. Okay, we met the savings targets. Let's say you don't have any savings targets necessarily post-FI. What are other things that go into your net worth roll up?
Yeah, the net worth tracker that I use, I would say about 3/4 of it is very much what people would expect. It's looking at how the balances change over time of after-tax accounts, of retirement accounts, banking, things like that. And then additionally, I use that same piece of real estate to track things that are outside of the portfolio, but are a convenient area to do financial roll-up. So tracking the equity in the house, right, remaining mortgage balance, the remaining 529 balance, like we have, an adult child in college. So watching that line item as well as some other financial kind of it's a convenient place to put them. So all of that ends up being part of the same exercise. And it just lets me have a good kind of overview. But it also makes it easy for me to communicate with Lori, my wife. What do you do?
In terms of the net worth roll up, I'm really focused more on the liquid net worth that are retirement assets. Yes. And so I'm looking at that on a year-on-year total increase. Is it going up? Hopefully it's going up, and so I'm looking at those things. I pay less attention to, we don't have any debt. So, obviously that would be a liability on the balance sheet, but we don't have any. So that's not really an issue for us. We're always paying attention to the 529s, and it's just convenient to check in January when tuition payment is due, and in August when, before tuition payment is due. So those two time zones. But that's been, the investments are fairly conservative at this point. I know you had some of your 529 funds actually sort of aliquoted out into different time spans, right? Are you still doing that, or have you moved it all to be conservative?
I do. I have the bulk of it in, conservative, and then I have another portion, a much smaller portion that's still has some, equity funds in it, just as a kicker. Basically, I don't think it's going to substantially move the needle, but and I'll kind of shift that every year.
Yeah. Okay. We had kept our funds in, they're in Nevada's plan, and Maine has a plan, and the investment options in Maine's plan, not great. So we're kind of liquidating those first, then we're moving to the Nevada one. And then we had saved some in some taxable brokerage accounts. And, it feels like just earning in a money market, 4.5% or whatever it is now, it's hard to beat that. So we're just kind of leaving those alone. But in terms of, my real looking at the net worth statement really is mostly about looking at what did the portfolio do over the past year. So how did you make out? We had a good year in the market.
Yeah, the market was great. Of course, my allocation is not 100% S&P, so my portfolio is not up 23%. But I also look at it net of withdrawal. Year on year, up over 8%. Net of withdrawal, so that feels pretty nice, especially given my asset allocation. Quarter over quarter, we all know things took a little dip, down a little over 1% here versus last quarter, but 8% year-on-year growth. I'm happy with that. Although I will say last year when we talked about this, I talked about being happy about that, and I got kind of attacked about not understanding the math about inflation and yada yada. Needless to say, I do understand the math. I do understand inflation. I'm still pleased. with that year-on-year result versus my withdrawal rate. But I have a feeling your number is a lot better than mine, especially given that you continue to contribute.
Yeah.
And I think you're still 80-20 instead of 70-30 like me.
Yeah, and maybe even a little higher.
Oh, man. I talked about changing mine, and you were like, oh, got to stick with the plan.
No, man.
Let's talk about this. Yeah, what are we doing here?
Well, I didn't hit for my performance band yet, so I just,
Oh.
doing a little momentum riding.
I see.
Yeah, so year-on-year portfolio gain net of contributions was 20%. I'm up 20%.
Bravo.
So S&P was up 23, so I thought that was pretty good because I still do have some bonds in there, so
Yeah.
kind of dragging me down a little bit. But I think it's one thing to look at your portfolio gain and be happy with a number. And I was talking to somebody recently about this, just saying, we were talking about the market, investments and things like that. And they're like, yeah, my portfolio's up 15% on the year. I'm like, but you do know the S&P was up 23, right?
Right.
So it's good, I think, to do this for that reason alone, to make sure that, maybe expenses have gotten really high in the funds that you're in. Maybe you need to make some changes in investment houses. One of the things that we did, I have a solo 401k with Vanguard, and Vanguard sold their individual retirement accounts off to a company called Ascensus to manage, basically.
I see.
And they're horrible. And,
Oh, no.
And fees, they have a lot of fees. And so I ended up moving that over to Fidelity, and that has its own set of hassles and games. But it's good to check in for those reasons alone, just to make sure you have eyes on it and to know where it's heading directionally.
Yeah. And, this isn't an asset allocation conversation, of course, but needless to say, while I'm not 100% S&P, I still consider myself very concentrated in terms of large cap U.S. equity. My largest position by far in my 70% equity is the S&P 500, but that doesn't mean that I don't also have a healthy stake in international and in small cap. So I still think some diversity there is not a bad idea.
You're still playing the small cap game, huh?
Yep, there's a little piece in there. Come on.
Well, that's
just large cap. I mean, I know that medium is mixed in there too. There's not really great separation, but ignoring the small cap as a whole, I think, I prefer with my funds to approach but not quite be overlapped with a total U.S. equity market. I think that level of diversification makes me feel good.
Yeah, good. All right.
Especially when we have a very small number of large caps dragging around the S&P right now. So
it's a little scary. I agree.
It's a little scary. So I'm pretty happy with not being that concentrated.
And the international, man, I don't know. There's a lot of forces at work here.
I'm aware, and of all the arguments pro and con international, even Jim Dolly and others agree that there's nothing wrong with having a piece in there. It's just how big you want that to be. Are you a 10% or a 25%er? I think 0 sounds pretty perilous, but hey, let the comments come in.
What about 3%?
That's extremely low. I don't think that's you, is it? Come on, man. I'm going to go back and replay those old asset allocations.
No, there's lots of different arguments to make, man.
Yeah, I know there are. I'm familiar with them.
We don't have to make them here. But
yeah, having business in other countries doesn't count. Let's move on.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, how so?
Come on, man. The businesses are so different internationally. As somebody who has worked for large multinationals, it's not the same thing.
All right, let's leave that one alone for now.
Let's leave that one alone. Agree to disagree. I have alternate facts, sir.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about, is that all you do for your net worth roll up there?
That's the net worth roll up.
Yeah.
It is just about
easy, right?
How did we do?
Yeah.
It's simple.
The other thing, overview and goal setting wise, oftentimes I think if you're pre-fi, you're thinking about, okay, how can I increase income, or if you're a business owner, how do I put systems in place to earn more? What am I, as part of this financial review and goal setting process, I think that needs to be something to think about in the same way that you're going to review insurances, it's like, well, how can I optimize this? The new year is a good time to do that. So I think that's hard to ignore. Sure. Yeah. And then also having some means of tracking your progress. And what I've been doing, and I started using it this year, was I've been using Projection Lab for this because I love that kind of graphical interface.
Yeah, it's a great UI.
Great goal setting tools in there and ways to model out just different scenarios. So I think that's something that's necessary. What did you use pre-fi to track progress on your FI numbers?
I am such a spreadsheet jockey that that's what I used before. It's what I use now. Although, like you, I'm starting to investigate Projection Lab. Yeah, I think it's a pretty fascinating piece of software, and there are others out there as well. New Retirement's another common one.
For sure.
I like them all. I just haven't yet moved to that being my primary source, but I can see where the potential is very real to get some of my spreadsheet stuff completely out into a lot slicker way to look at it.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. If we talk about post-FI kind of, overview and goal setting, from pre-FI, your goal is really more about maintaining wealth, right? Probably managing withdrawal rates. I want to ask you about that. And then maybe some side income. Maybe that's kind of crept its way into your life now. So what does that look like in terms of, maintaining wealth, managing withdrawal rates, things like that for you?
Yeah, the easy and obvious one for anybody who's been watching the show for a while is going to be my take on how I use, Karsten Jeska's Safe Withdrawal Rate Toolbox. Okay. And for somebody who has no idea what we're talking about, just go to twosidesoffi.com/toolbox. We have a whole series of episodes. You and I both use it. In short, for those who aren't familiar with it, this is my main tracker to look at on a monthly basis and an aggregate for the year. How did I do versus my withdrawal rate max target? And so I use a simple ceiling based method where I want to stay below what the CAPE adjusted withdrawal rate recommendations are from the tool. So that's the first thing. And I look at that monthly so I know how the year has been going. It's only about 5 minutes every month, but I have a check-in. And so at the end of the year, it allows me to say, okay, in aggregate, what happened? And for example, this year, looking at the spreadsheet, 3 months we went over our ceiling. The majority of the remaining, we were kind of close to the ceiling or below it. And so that's good. We didn't, on net, we stayed below our most important target, which is looking at the aggregate, kind of CAPE withdrawals every month, making sure we're below that. I think the target or the maximum would have been 4.31%. I know Ern likes the 2 decimal places, so tip of the hat to him.
It's important.
It's important. And for me, the aggregate, me and Lori, it was 4.19. So definitely higher than last year in terms of our closeness to it. And that was driven by largely increased travel spending and some medical and then also pet expenses this year. As you know, we have a veritable zoo and a couple of our senior animals required more care this year. And we don't have pet insurance, for example. So happy that we're below the target. I will admit in those months when we go over, I still get a small amount of trepidation, but it lasts about a minute. And because I know that on net for the year, it's going to look like this. And so I want to stay below it and not have it feel like we're making any lifestyle changes to get there. And that's a really important one that Lori and I have talked a lot about. And that's, let's make sure our budget going into this and as we continue to go still feels good to us. And so, we increased our travel spending a year ago as a result of our conversations here on Two Sides of Fi, is also Lori and I talking. And that has felt really good. So that is how I do withdrawal rate tracking, looking at it monthly and then just looking at it at the end of the year. Okay, but it's not a big time consumption.
So over 4%.
Over 4%, yeah. I have done a good job. Good is my word. I think yours, because, I was definitely the first couple of years watching things too closely and keeping my thumb on the spending in some ways that maybe weren't hitting our overall lifestyle goals.
Well, as a scientist, you know that you'll never be able to prove that it wasn't because you did that.
Exactly.
That your retirement was successful. So
yep, no idea. We only in retrospect can we look back at the graph of what our portfolio was, compared to all those, C-Fire sim lines or whatever software you use to see, which Monte Carlo simulation was actually like your reality.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the year, do you just plug in a new set of results and just reduce the timeline by a year?
Yeah, actually, it's even worse than that. Every month, I just deduct a month off my projected lifespan. And
that's morbid, man.
And it just makes it easy to track on. I mean, I know months, just like years, are kind of arbitrary, or they are arbitrary. But I like looking, since I think about budget on a monthly basis, I like seeing if our spending month over month how that kind of fleshes out. And it's not something I have to think about at all. It's just very obvious. I still use YNAB, you need a budget. And I see that number that I spent every month in expenses, and I just plug it in the spreadsheet. So it's a couple minutes, and then I'm done.
So you are truly reverse dollar cost averaging here. You're pulling out of the portfolio every single month.
I am, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't have to take withdrawals out of the portfolio every month because I also rebalance twice a year.
Okay.
And in doing so,
it's the cash bucket.
Refill the cash. Okay. Yeah. To keep my cash stake, which is, around 5%.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. All right. Well, that's good news there. I want to kind of move on to the second category I had, which was portfolio management. So as part of just a kind of annual financial review, pre-fi, I think there's a very specific order of operations that you're going to go through. And I hate using that word because of another very famous podcast, which they say it all too often. But, obviously
it's a good concept.
You're going to maximize your retirement account contributions. You want to, if you're working for someone, you want to get that employer match if that's available to you. If you're self-employed like I am, I'm funding like a solo K at the beginning of the year usually, to make sure that we're optimizing our tax situation there. Second, we want to do a Roth IRA contribution that may be traditional if you're eligible for that, or via the back door. And then you're going to probably start filling up your taxable brokerage account after that if you can do both of those things. Of course, you want to use tax efficient index funds. And this is just going to serve as your bridge if you're retiring early. I know you're finding a lot of value in drawing down your taxable account, right?
Oh yeah, that's all we do.
Yep.
The only activity in the other accounts is just making sure at rebalancing time things are taken care of. That's it.
Yeah. You have this great rebalancing spreadsheet that you offer for free that Laura and I have been using. And you can set up the kind of performance bands if you want to use it that way. And I love that tool, man. That's
thanks.
Super handy. Yeah.
So glad to hear it. I still use it. It's still available for free. We didn't change that. Is it still twosidesoffi.com/rebalancing?
I believe so. Yeah.
I'll put that in the show notes as well. But yeah, I'm so glad to hear you're finding it useful. So you're still using it now. And do you foresee how do you rebalance now? And do you foresee that changing once you start drawing down as opposed to having business income? What do you think?
I rebalance probably twice a year. But I'm checking in on when I was moving the solo K over to Fidelity. That was a chance. I had to sell all the positions, and they sent a paper check. I mean, it's so ridiculous how they do this, but they couldn't transfer funds in kind. And
really,
yeah.
I had no idea.
It's nuts. So things were out of the market for about a month and a half, which is kind of hard to handle. So anyway, when we got the funds back, we started using the rebalancing calculator. It was an opportunity to set things straight again. I'm not sure how it will change. I think when we stop operating the business, other than a lot of the cash flow is so the cash position is coming from the business right now. So I'll probably just continue to check in on it. Every couple of months and rebalance as needed. If we move to post-fi in terms of portfolio management, let's talk about some of the things here. So you're obviously going to be capturing any cash flow from income producing assets. You're going to use those to fund your lifestyle. You're not reinvesting dividends, right?
No, but I get that question a lot. It's worth a second on. People ask all the time. I just had a former colleague ask me that question as he gets ready to retire.
Oh, really?
I let those dividends flow in the taxable accounts, and then they just become part of my cash allocation, right? I already didn't choose when they got taxed here, right? They get taxed as income, and of course that depends on whether they're ordinary or not, how they're treated, but that's a separate topic. But I don't then reinvest them and then pay taxes again on gains on those. They just become part of the cash allocation, and it all balances out on the balance sheet when I do my next rebalancing, because if I had a lot of dividends at that time of year for some reason, I'm just going to sell less when I rebalance to hit my cash amount. So yes, I don't reinvest them.
Okay. A lot of sort of post-fi portfolio management is probably about managing cash reserves, right?
Yeah, it's so boring. It's really boring. I don't have to be in my portfolio. I just dip in there kind of once every month or two. And if any dividends are thrown, move them out. I already have, as you mentioned, the rebalancing spreadsheet, and I have mine connected to via Google Finance. So I can see in real time if things are out of whack. That's just how I have mine set up. And so I'll know if I need to rebalance, but I won't do it until my twice a year periods come. I'm not a opportunistic rebalancer.
Oh.
Nope. I do it in May and November, and that's it. And it's usually around the middle of the month. It's not even a set day. Just take a peek at how things are going, and do my rebalancing. Other than that, I'm not in the portfolio. This year, I actually did the most portfolio work in a long time, and it's still not very interesting. And it was just, using ACAT transfer to move a certain portion of funds out to a different brokerage where I'm doing my options trading, so that it's completely separate from my buy and hold portfolio.
Okay.
But yeah, other than that, it's no dopamine hit from playing with the portfolio.
I mean, do you ever keep an eye on it? If I think about 2022, markets down, chance to do some Roth conversions. Do you ever think about it from that perspective?
I do. And I look at that on an annual basis to think about that opportunity. I also think the same way about tax loss harvesting.
Yeah.
So,
or gain
as
harvesting.
you point out, or gain harvesting. So yes, I will do that if we're in any unusual market conditions. Also, if our income situation has changed, right now we're well below the long-term capital gains 0% threshold.
Yeah.
So don't have to worry about those. But that's an item that I track on my portfolio sheet just to see how we're doing, from an income perspective. And also, if my income changes so that my tax bracket situation changes, that's also an opportunity to revisit the opportunity for Roth conversion. Because, for example, if I scale up my options trading and I get pushed into a different tax bracket, well, the opportunities are different. So I absolutely do keep an eye on that stuff. It doesn't occupy a lot of cycles of brain time, but it is something at the start of a year that I consider when I think about my goals for income.
Yeah. I don't want to get too in the weeds on it here, but great opportunities to use Projection Lab in these situations.
Yes, I am absolutely looking at that. Not as we speak, but this morning I was in there doing the same thing.
Yeah, I love looking at how the different brackets are filling up based on your income, and you can test out different scenarios. Do some projections on it. So, great tool.
And that's really valuable for me because it really ties into this. I know it's a different topic, but when you talk about income, many of us in the U.S. are thinking about ACA. We're thinking about health insurance, premium tax credits. And for us right now, we're handily below the ceiling where we don't pay anything towards premiums, mostly because we have a bronze plan. If we had a silver plan, we'd have to pay a little bit, gold, more than that, and so on. But, if we change our income situation, well, those are going to change too. And now you have to account for that change to premium tax credits and tax brackets. And so these things do interact. So I am also thinking about those things in the same context. And I usually that's an annual thought process.
Yeah.
Just do I anticipate something different happening this year that would make me do something different?
I think that's high on the priority roadmap for Projection Lab is to add in the ACA
I heard that.
Tax implications there.
That's going to be huge.
Thank God I'm not a developer
I'm doing
there.
it in spreadsheets right now, like most people do probably.
It's painful how all of it interacts, man. And if you're operating a business, it's even more complex. So,
yeah. There are some people on Reddit who are wizards at that stuff. If you haven't run into stuff by Zephyr, there's so much good guidance out there about how to think about that if it applies in anyone's particular income situation. So definitely look at the financial independence and fire subreddits. There's lots of good info out there that neither of us are experts in.
Yeah. One last thing I want to hit on portfolio management. Are you thinking at all about, now you're entering year 6, right?
Yeah.
Are you thinking at all about doing a reverse glide path, like a rising equity glide path here, or what's your feeling on that?
In concept, I completely agree, and I've read what people like Kitsis and what Karsten have written on this topic. I actually am in favor of that for a variety of reasons. I haven't determined the when and what kind of slope. But this year, I haven't planned to do anything different, of course. It's still pretty early in what my hopeful lifespan is.
Okay. Well, think about what those bonds are going to do, man. Nobody knows.
I know, believe me. Well,
Nobody
and
knows.
that's why, half of that's why I think about extra income from options as not a mitigation, but as a balance to my thoughts about conservatism in the buy and hold portfolio, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, keeping it all short term is not a bad play right now, boys.
Yeah, I know. I probably have way too much intermediate term right now.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, I've been doing a lot of reading on this lately, man. And
have you? I would like you to share your sources.
Well, I haven't reached any conclusions yet. So.
Oh man. I'll share some of my options learnings. Maybe we could trade.
Oh God. No, that's over my head, man. I'm not into that stuff. Sorry.
So much fun.
Okay, so let's move on to spending. Tracking and awareness is a lot of what this is about. So tools for doing this, budgeting apps like YNAB. You use YNAB.
Love it, man.
There is
Still use it.
There is no Mint anymore. There's Monarch. I think Monarch Money has replaced that. I don't use that.
Nope.
We just use a spreadsheet, man.
Yeah, spreadsheets are great.
Yeah, I don't use YNAB. You're still using it though.
I am. I mean, the granularity and the frequency of check-in has changed, but I just love the way it, semi-automatically categorizes everything, and I just make little adjustments to things, just like Mint, where it didn't classify them right. It just makes it easy for me to see trends over time. I've thought about moving. I thought by this year maybe I would be moving away from it, but right now it's like, man, for me that's like what, $9 a month, and I view that as a reasonable expense because it makes it simple. But my granularity over the years has changed a lot. And so now it's so helpful at the end of the year when Lori's like, well, how do we do on travel? And what are our international trips look like in terms of expenses versus our domestic ones? And, are we, is the money we budgeted working out? Does that make sense? So it's been really helpful for stuff like that. And I think the calculus I've done is if it's not costing very much in the way of time, maybe it's worth it to keep it up.
Yeah. No, that's good, man. We do it kind of annually. I hate budgeting. Laura and I don't really do a lot of budgeting here, but past couple of years we've been paying attention to it, and we just use our credit card statement because we put everything on our credit cards and it categorizes it for us.
That's perfect.
So that's enough for us. But I can see if you're tighter on the FI number and you don't have any padding, you got to pay more attention to budgets. That's just the way it is. And if you're pre-FI, I think you're trying to identify low value spending, like a lot of people say unused subscriptions and things like that.
Right.
But also you're trying to use it to see trend changes, where are things getting more expensive, where your FI budget may need adjusting. For us, like the past couple of years, it's been travel. Like you said, we're looking at travel. We're like, this will
increasing.
Yeah. This amount of money will be good enough. But now, like getting airfare anywhere right now is super expensive. So that has changed, the cost of lodging, the cost of, just doing activities while you're out.
Up a lot.
Cost of food is up, eating out is up a ton. So we realized we just needed to increase that line item quite a bit. And so it does help to track it, I think, along the way.
It does. It does.
I always I laugh a little bit about not laugh, but just reducing kind of subscriptions and minor expenses and
stuff that doesn't move the needle.
Yeah. So I mean, we try and focus on the big three, and I think for most people that's housing, transportation, and food. And but just recognize that yours could be different. For us, housing is zero. So that But our travel budget, our healthcare costs now that we're Laura's insurance is poof gone, and food, that's going to be our top three. So I think really you got to look at those areas first, and that's going to move the needle a lot more if you're pre-FI.
Well, and here's a post-FI kind of anecdote for me. Honestly, the biggest aspect of budgeting is just reassurance. Even at this stage, I just love seeing that categorization at a glance every month, and at the end of the year to know like we're doing fine. Yeah. Like we're okay. Our projections weren't off a ton. And in that first year, second year, third year, it's all so new. Yeah. It's really the first time you're testing it in earnest without the backdrop of, the safety net of a paycheck. Yeah. And so for me, it still gives me a lot of comfort just to look in and be like, yep, Everything's on track.
I feel that difference, man, because
I like that.
I mean, even just now the trips we're taking, I said to Laura, I was like, look, we have the capacity to overspend our budget by like significantly. And the business is still generating income. So it almost feels easier to do that. And so we wanted to be able to really track, okay, we just came back from a couple of different trips and we didn't rein in spending at all, but I still want to see what that looks like. Cause if that's exceeding what we had budgeted, we absolutely have to make changes, and we have to look at the implications of that. And, you know, even if it's just to say, okay, well, we need to adjust somewhere else. We need to take it from somewhere else, but I want to have an eye on it. So that we can adjust before it becomes a real problem, because I mean, you know, hedonic adaptation is a real thing.
It's real. And, you know, honestly, I think if you ask most people, and especially when you start talking about a week or 10 days or 2-week long trips, if you ask them what they think they spent before they look, they will always underestimate it. Because Lori and I have had this conversation so many times. We think we're both smart people who pay attention to expenses, but when you look at those calculations in aggregate, you're often surprised. And it's like you have the flights pretty well in your head. You remember, oh yeah, that flight was $900. Yeah. But you don't really mentally, I think most of us accumulate very well what food and gas and whatever costs. And I think it's important to look at that.
Totally is. And, you know, we just came back from this trip. One of our big trips was to the Caribbean, and you do that in January and it's high season. Yeah. Everything costs a ton, you know, everything you're doing, from renting a Jeep to going out to eat to taking an excursion while you're there. It's like, whoa. I mean, this is like at least twice what it costs back at home to do a similar kind of thing. I mean, even just like groceries, you know. And we basically said to ourselves while we were there, like, is it more important that we're here, or is it more important that we're here and doing this, and renting the cool house and or is it just we want to be here at this time of year because that's important to us, to get away to a warm place? And, you know, can we leave these three things off to the side and say, this is enough? And it's an interesting conversation. And it's like, we don't have a fully fleshed out answer, but I think we're trending more toward like, well, it's more important that we're there than it is to have all the bells and whistles on top of it too.
Well, I mean, even, you know, in planning this trip to Scotland that we've mentioned before in the show, you know, you were surprised, I think, the way that Lori and I think about the price of housing, because, you know, for us, it's not a priority like to stay in a place that looks like X, Y, or Z. Like for us, if we're thinking about a fixed budget, we'd rather put that towards like better meals or like better transportation. But I think there are no wrong priorities there. Yeah. But it's important to know, like you're saying, what's important to you, and to honestly evaluate as time goes on, because your opinion may change, what is important and what should you keep spending towards, and what maybe isn't as important as you might have thought it was. Yeah.
No, that's been interesting. It's definitely been an interesting contrast, because I can see where you guys aren't willing to spend, but we are. And
vice versa.
Yeah. And for a lot of different reasons. And we're pretty, I think, convicted on a lot of those things. There's a few that we're probably willing to give up, but anyway, it's going to be fun to see how it changes over time.
For sure. Yeah. It's like everything in life. Very few things are consistent.
Yeah. So, you know, post-fi, what's different post-fi? You know, you want to minimize overspending probably. Yep. You're still tracking. You're probably worried about some unexpected costs. I know healthcare has been, I know, a changing thing for you guys. You've had some years where you've spent a lot more, and obviously there's inflation. Anything else? Any surprises here?
No, I think at a high level, you hit the nail on the head. Is there some big unforeseen event that will kind of derail or put a big change in any of the equations that back all this planning we did? So whether it's a dramatic and very prolonged market downturn, for example, or hyperinflation, or, you know, things that are wholly out of your control, and your only response is to, you know, figure out where to cut costs. I do worry about these things, but I've also tried to remind myself we have a plan. You can't plan for every contingency as part of that plan. I think we're well set up to adapt to most things that are foreseeable, and the black swan events that are out there, you're going to deal with them when you deal with them, right? Nobody plans for a terrible natural disaster that they lose their home in, right? As we see in the news today. But we can take some measures like insurance, for example, but none of that's a guarantee, right? Circumstances could change that are out of our control. So try not to worry about those too much. But yeah, at the end of the day, is there an unforeseeable event that could just take this whole thing off the rails?
The other thing that I think about is, how do you deal with this idea of, when you want to spend more in a certain place, like travel, for example, like, maybe I under budgeted here. And that's how do you correct for that? Is part of you wanting to earn more income by trading options related to that?
It is related to that. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's more like nice to have. So thankfully, and I'm very appreciative that we're in this situation where we haven't found that there are things that we must have or that we really want that are not accommodatable by our budget. But we have had this discussion of, hey, are there things we can do to increase our ability to fund things that are not part of our budget? Or if we want to travel a little better, or we want to go home more often to see family, how do we pay for that outside of our budget without cutting like our groceries or things like that? And so for those, nice to have stuff, I am, now, trading options in what I think is a very reasonable way, and in a different strategy than I talked about with Karsten. Not to say that that's a bad strategy, but I'm doing something different and a little more diverse. But that's nice to have money, and it is allocated separately. It has its own line item in the budget as it's a sinking fund, basically. And once I hit a certain amount of return, that comes out of that fund and it's in the budget. And that's for those expenses. Like if we want to travel in a little nicer class of travel for flights, for example, the money could go towards that. Or, if we had budgeted to go home, twice a year or 4 times a year to see certain family, well, we can increase that. And so we're looking at that as nice to have and relatively low risk in terms of, the way it's set up and the hedging that's built in. But yeah, that is actually why we're doing it, because we didn't save a multiple over what we thought we would need for budgeting. So I think we have good guardrails and good safety nets in there, but it's not like there's all this unallocated money in our net worth that we can just start pulling from. And so that is why I'm trading options. How about you? How are you thinking about this? And especially as you are continuing to earn with the business, does that change the equation a little bit for you? And how do you think about it?
Yeah. So this year I've, now all that money that I used to be throwing in my taxable brokerage and investing, it's just all going to like additional funds to add to, increase our travel. So it's been such a hard transition for me to make.
For sure.
I'm so not used to exercising the spending muscle. I'm not good at it, like I know we talked about this a couple of years ago and I was giving you a hard time about it, but it's definitely different. And I'm just gonna have to get used to it. But
and I'm not sitting here in judgment of what you did.
Yes,
before.
You are.
I'm not, because it's one of those things that until you feel that change, you don't know what it's like. And now that, like you said, the insurance went away, that paycheck went away. Right. And now you're talking about not saving as much of that money in your portfolio. So it is a difference.
But I don't have like a savings goal. Like I don't have a savings goal. So it's got to be a spending goal.
Right.
And it doesn't mean we can blow everything out, but it also just means we can do more of what we like doing. And so that's important to prioritize what you want to do and then figure out how you want to do it and what feels good to spend money on. So, it's all, I think it's going to be a changing situation. It's
right.
I don't see me being able to adapt like all at once, but
no, I think there are a few things our brains are capable of adapting to all at once. It's gradual.
Yeah. But like, for example, I'm used to this time of year, just taking all of the income that the business is earning and just completely funding a solo 401k account with it. Like 100% just in these first couple of months. And I'm not doing that this year for lots of different reasons, but part of this is to say, look, we said this was enough. And so now we're going to live the life that we have been, saving for.
That's
So,
right.
Yeah, it's different.
It's all gradual. Comfort comes over time. I mean, because we talked about it before in the show, we had some pretty severe market downturns pretty early in my post-fi life. And, they caused me more consternation then than they would now.
Yes.
And I don't watch the market like this, even though I am trading options. And when I see quarterly, it's down 4%, for example, it bothers me much less. And in fact, it doesn't really bother me now. Would it bother me if quarter over quarter I saw it turning down? Yeah, I'm not that bulletproof at this stage of the game. Yeah. But I mean, that comfort comes with time.
Totally.
I think that's normal.
Yeah. Let's talk about tax strategy for a minute, because I think that has to factor into it. Pre-fi, we're obviously maximizing tax advantage accounts, right?
Right.
Health savings account, 401k, 403b, your traditional IRA account. We talked about that a little bit. And if you can, building a taxable brokerage account. With that taxable brokerage account, and I want to ask you about this, if you can use tax loss harvesting to offset gains or reduce taxable income, that's always a good thing, right?
For sure.
Are you doing any of this even post-fi?
Yeah, I did, certainly during those downturns we talked about before, where there were substantial losses that could
a lot of carry forward on that, huh?
Yeah, still carrying some of those forward.
Me too.
And and now I know what funds to rotate in and out of, so it's actually very straightforward. If we are in that situation again, so that's that. But yeah, the other things you mentioned, I do fund my HSA, do fund Roth. I mean, I do think about taxation, but I mean, barring a big change this year, like, really increasing and, the sizing of the options, we're still going to be in the same tax bracket.
Okay.
We're going to be below the long-term capital gain ceiling. So if anything, we owe a couple $100. And so I don't really have to think about tax that much. And also the answer to this differs, right? If you have a lot of tax deferred savings, in 401ks, for example, then you really have to, the burden is much more on you to think about Roth optimization.
Yeah.
And again, using the types of tools we've talked about here to plan that out, because you have lots of opportunity often in those early years where you're not taking withdrawals from those accounts. And so your tax bracket is low and you can fill up to whatever level is appropriate based on your projections and get those tax savings. So yeah, for many people, it's super important.
Yeah, I was surprised actually using Projection Lab to see what the Roth conversion strategy was going to be for me. And that in some ways has colored my, thinking about contributing to, tax deferred accounts right now, because we're going to have an RMD problem at some point. And so do I want to continue making that problem worse, or just, pay the tax now? Anyway, I want to talk about maybe some state-specific benefits. If you're still contributing to a 529, you obviously want to manage that for tax deductions and things like that. And then self-employed people want to take advantage of the solo K. For us, we were able to contribute $76,500 to that last year, as both the employee and the employer. That obviously depends on the amount of self-employment income you have.
That's right.
So you have to do those calculations. You can also deduct expenses for the business, and that's, we took advantage of a lot of those opportunities. There's a lot of advantages to having, a business, being self-employed. Absolutely. That you should not forget in your annual wrap up. Post-fi, I'm thinking a lot about like tax efficient withdrawals, health insurance and ACA subsidies. Like how you generate your paycheck, how you generate your income has a lot to do with what you're paying for your healthcare, right?
It does. Absolutely.
Yep.
Got to think about it.
So you're always managing that. You're always keeping an eye on that.
I keep an eye on it. Yeah. And it's one of the things that was in my planning this year in terms of thinking about my options sizing. It was not just about my risk tolerance, risk capacity, but it's also about, okay, well, if I size at this level, is my income going to change to the degree potentially, right, if things go well, that I have to now rethink what my income is like from an ACA perspective, and potentially change my my thoughts on how it's going to impact my taxes, which has other roll-on effects. And so, even good things like increased earnings could have and will have impact on other things that could be viewed as negatives if you don't plan for them.
So Jay, I mean, this year stands alone as being the year I reached financial independence. So, I'm crossing both the pre-fi and the post-fi checklists here. So it feels good to reflect back and look back on the advances and the gains. And I look forward to doing this again next year with kind of a different perspective because, my goals are different now. And
That's right.
Not having that big FI goal in front of me changes things quite a bit. So I'm happy with the year. It's hard not to be happy given the market performance.
Yes.
How would you summarize your year?
I'm happy with the year. And I think the thing I'm happiest about when it comes to the kind of the topic we're talking about here is how little I care about the mechanical elements of it now. They're
Right.
just things that I enjoy doing them, but they take so little time and it's taking less time each year that it's just a thing I think of like a checklist item. And I think that's what it should get to.
Yeah.
I mean, people who are excited about it and love looking at the numbers 10 different ways, they're probably still going to love that.
Yeah.
But for me, I just view this as a necessity. It's confirmation. It feels good. So I'm happy with where my comfort level is on all this and look forward to a year of hopefully good market performance and things going well for the family. And yeah.
All right, man. Well, it's good chatting. Happy New Year.
Happy New
We'll
Year.
speak to you next week.
All right, man. Take care.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.